Jeff, let me begin with you. You are in Ontario, and what's your reaction to the Premier's plan to remove some of the bike lanes in Toronto?
Yeah, it's a very curious decision, and the plan is, I think it's fair to say, contrary to where the planning profession, the transportation profession has been going. We've been working for decades to try and diversify our transportation activity, moving away from private automobiles towards more sustainable modes that are more accessible, more available to a greater segment of the population. And so bicycles are certainly an important part of that planning. It's been, all over Canada. It's been in Montreal and in Edmonton. Investments have been being made. So really, this is a very different step here in Ontario than what's happening, not just in Canada, but around the world.
And speaking of Edmonton, Orest, that's where you are. You're a retired teacher, a cyclist, somebody who has written and obviously thought about the issues of cyclists on the roads. From afar, how do you feel about Ford's plan?
Well, I'm familiar with Bloor Street, but I can compare it to Jasper Avenue here in Edmonton, which is our main sort of east-west thoroughfare through our downtown. We don't have a bike lane on Jasper Avenue, but our city put in a bike lane 1 block south of Jasper Avenue, and it stretches for about 1.5 kilometers. And I use it at least once a week, and it's very well organized in that there's a dedicated bike lane going both ways, and there's traffic lights dedicated to bicyclists. So it's very, very well planned and very easy to use, and I think it's very successful.
When I think of Edmonton, it's a city I visit quite a bit. I think of, big, long commutes a lot of people take, often in vehicles. I think of a place that gets really cold in the winter. Orest, what's it like to be a cyclist in Edmonton?
Well, in summer, I think it's great. I think we have excellent weather. But I think what's happening in winter cycling is with the advent of fat bikes, and especially with the advent of e-bikes, it's becoming more and more easier to cycle in winter. And our city of Edmonton made quite an effort to make bike lanes, the more popular ones, cleared every winter. So within 24 hours after it snows, there's a real solid attempt to get those cleared. So I think our city is going in the right way in that regard.
Jeff, presumably Premier Ford thinks there's political support for his plan. So I wonder, as somebody with expertise in planning, what do you think needs to be done to get more public support, more political support for more bike lanes?
Yeah, I think that this is very much a populist agenda, and it's it's not inconsistent with the way this government has operated. There is this horrible congestion problem. All of us agree. Every transportation professional agrees that there's a horrible congestion problem in Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area. And it's very easy to be alone in your car and looking at this bike lane and watching people pass you in the bike lane and think, well, if that bike lane weren't there, I would be able to travel more quickly. But that's simply not true. This sense that there is a dichotomy that bike lanes necessarily create congestion for autos is just not true. The data are evident that that's the case. And so this is, again, as I said earlier, just a really curious decision, and it's just inconsistent with best practices. I think that we definitely have to address the congestion problem, but removing bike lanes isn't the solution.
Jeff, I think if I talk to any planner, they would give us that answer, that it seems pretty clear that the planning community supports more bike lanes. But I guess I get back to my question. What do you think it's going to take to sell this to people, to get broad public support for more bike lanes, even in a congested city like Toronto?
Yeah, so I think there is a very strong proportion of the population who already do cycle, but our own data suggests that there is great support for cycling. The Share the Road group in Ontario did a survey, and 70% of the respondents said that they would be interested in be supportive of more bicycle infrastructure. The notion, again, is that we have to create spaces that are safe and accessible for people, and the more people that do travel, the better the experience is going to be for those who are traveling by bikes. And I think the population is ready for that change. There is a small subset of ardent drivers who are going to, fight any kind of reduction in space dedicated to the cars between the curbs. But that's not the reality of the situation. I think there's an educational component. I think there is a public outreach component. I do think we need those who are supportive of bike lanes to be more vocal outside of the planning and the professional community, because I do think that there is a large proportion of the population who are prepared to support these bike lanes. And again, I don't think this proposal by the Premier really resonates with the community here in Ontario.
And Orest, you make an interesting point that it's not good enough just to have a bike lane. It needs to be a useful bike lane, and that's not always the case in Edmonton.
That's correct. The bike lane that I was describing earlier is very successful. We have pretty, I'm not sure what the term would be, but very unsuccessful bike lanes in that they, instead of being bike lanes where commuters can use, they seem to have been designed like obstacle courses. A little bit left, a little bit right, go up a little bit by the bus stop, go down. And really, if you travel faster than 5 or 10 kilometers an hour, you're asking for trouble. Very, very poorly designed bike lanes. And I understand why people would be upset. The bike lane is put in front of their house. It's hard to park, and you can sit out in the front window and maybe 1 or 2 bikes per hour. So very poorly designed and very poorly placed. The particular ones that I'm thinking of were placed on a fairly residential street where there's very little traffic. And it seems that cars and bikes could fairly easily share the road there. So yes, we have very good bike lanes in Edmonton, and we have some quite poorly designed ones.
Well, there is a better way, and we'll see if Canadian cities are willing to go there. Orest and Jeff, thank you very much for speaking with us this evening.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.